have with us Principal Economic Advisor Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal. Mr. Sanyal, many thanks for joining us on BloombergQuint. There's an option given to taxpayers. They can either stick to the earlier tax rates or they can avail the new rates. So isn't this complicating the tax regime further, where the taxpayers will be confused which tax rate I should avail, because there is still no clarity which exemptions would go, which exemptions will these taxpayers be able to avail. So what's your view on that? Isn't it complicating things a bit rather than simplifying it further?
Well, I mean, there are two tracks. So the existing track remains. We are just providing an option for a completely simplified system. Incidentally, we did this with the corporate tax rates system as well. When we reduced them, we introduced a new track, people who can go onto it. But at the same time, we have continued with the old system just so that we provide a degree of transition time. Why is this important? So in the corporate tax case, we had promised a certain tax regime based on which people had made investments. We can't simply uproot the whole thing and say, okay, now we have a simple system, it's good. So we provided people the opportunity to continue with that for a period of time. And while we are encouraging people to come out of the new system. The same thing is true for the personal income tax. People plan their lives, their consumption patterns, their saving patterns, etc., based on a certain system. You have to provide transition time. So we have provided transition time. Those who want to remain on the older system are free to remain on the older system. They don't have to know anything about the new system at all. I mean, so it's no further complication. And those who want to move on to a completely simple system with very few exemptions, there will be a few that will probably still be kept on. But by and large, an extremely simple system. And, they can go on to it, and that's that.
Will the exemptions like ATC continue? And since the finance minister also said that we'll be probably moving to a completely to a regime where there'll be no exemptions further, because exemptions tend to complicate the situation further. So are we going to move to a tax regime where there'll be no exemptions?
So I think a list is about to be given out, and may have already been done so, where what will be retained in the new regime will be notified.
Okay. You also spoke about several steps that the government has taken to deepen the bond markets, to deepen the corporate bonds market especially. And the speech also says that you're opening up government securities for foreign investors. Could you share some more light on it? How is going to benefit the bond market per se?
So, we retain a certain amount of capital controls on foreign investment into government securities. Now, this is not an unreasonable thing to do because of the well-known impossible trinity problem, which is that if you completely get rid of capital controls, then you will have a situation where we'll either lose control of monetary policy or of the exchange rate. So that is why we have retained these controls. Now, but having these controls, a 6% limit, for example, means, however, that we can't be included in global bond indices, because global bond indices, for their own clientele, insist that you have to completely free things up. If you have to completely free these things up, then obviously we will have that impossible trinity problem. So one way of circumventing this debate is to take some securities, government securities, outside of these limits, place them outside of the system. These bonds will now be completely free. Domestic players can buy and sell them as they wish, but foreign investors can also buy and sell them as they wish. They'll be rupee denominated, and of course there's already a system of Euroclear and other things that are allowed, so they can be freely traded worldwide as people may wish. Now, immediately what this does is creates a class of bonds that can be included in global bond indices, which is what, if you will remember, when Prime Minister had gone to New York, he was in the Bloomberg conference, he had promised that we would want Indian bonds to be included in the Bloomberg and other bond indices. So what this means is that we are now going to create this new class of securities which are eligible for being included in global bond indices.
Right. Another thing that the ECO survey suggested was cutting food subsidy. And what we've seen today in the budget is that the government has reduced the food subsidy, in the budget, but however there's been other than budgetary allocation done, that is extra EBRs, budgetary resources that have been allocated for food subsidy. So firstly, why the cut? And secondly, we again started the EBR exercise where we allocating making allocations below the budget, below the line.
So first of all, let's be very clear.
So isn't that adding to complexity? The government had earlier said that we'll transparently inform our investors what is the liability. So here more and more EBRs make it difficult for investors to calculate the liability.
So in fact, that is not quite true. You see, the extra budgetary resources have always existed. And the problem really was that there was a complete lack of clarity and transparency about how much this is. I mean, if you go back, there used to be oil bonds and all kinds of large amounts. You know, if I remember correctly, the oil bonds went into 1.4 lakh crores or something like that. So very large amounts of money were kept outside the budget, even though they were basically serviced by the budget. So here we have continued to take on EBRs. Their servicing from the budget will be in the budget. But when they are in the EBRs, we have provided you complete transparency of what these are. So what we have not done is suddenly created new EBRs. We are just telling you what they are in a very transparent way in an appendix. So I don't think you should be too concerned about the fact that we are being transparent about what anyway existed and everybody knew it existed.
Okay, and the food subsidy cut?
So food subsidy cut is a matter of judgment about what from year to year what is needed, and you know, that's what has been judged by the expenditure secretary. So that's what it is.
There's no budgetary allocation made for recapitalizing public sector banks. There's going to be significant amount. There's going to be many mergers that are going to take place in the public sector banking space that have already been announced by the government. So there's not been any budgetary allocation made as yet. So will the government still stick to recapitalizing public sector banks through recapitalization bonds, or there's going to be budgetary allocation? How is it going to happen?
It depends if the banking system needs it. Our understanding is now with through the IBC process, a significant amounts of money are now coming back to the banking system and they're being written back. So under these situations, we don't think there is any large recapitalization that is needed. If there's some small institution that needs it, we'll provide it. But I don't think that we are anymore in that phase where we were recapitalizing banks, forcing them to write down and provision things. We are in fact, if anything, on the other side of that cycle, where we are writing back things, we are getting monies back from the IBC process, banks are finally liquid enough to begin growing again, and although they haven't begun to lend on a big scale yet, they have the resources and liquidity now to do it. So in that sense, the game has changed.
Okay, so you think all public sector banks are capable now to raise money from the market?
The big ones certainly, the big ones certainly.
And what happens to the smaller ones?
They may be the odd one which may need support, but I don't think that's particularly, it would require very much.
Okay, I'll leave you at that, yes. Sir. Thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg.
Thank you.